I now hand over the proceedings to Judy Kroll, University of California, Irvine, who will introduce our keynote speaker. So Judy, please come up.
It is an honor and very special privilege to introduce Suparna Rajaram this evening. Suparna is SUNY Distinguished Professor of Psychology at Stony Brook University, where she was recognized this year as the 2025 Professor's Outstanding Mentor. I first met Suparna 25 years ago here at Psychonomics. Like many of you, Suparna was drawn to the elegance of experimental science, exploiting the power of converging evidence from experimental psychology and patient studies to examine memory processes. The questions addressed in her early work were foundational in investigating the basic cognitive processes that shape the formation of memories and that influence the act of remembering. But those of us who love the laboratory are often criticized for ignoring the complexity of the social world around us, the real world. And this is where Suparna has had the courage to take on that complexity and to understand that memory, like other cognitive processes, unfolds in a context that is inherently social, that is shaped by those with whom we interact, and in the culture in which we live. Her research has been recognized by numerous awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship and elected fellow positions at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Society of Experimental Psychologists, the AAAS, and more. But courage runs deep and tells us not only about the science, but about the person. All of you who are early career scientists thinking about how on earth we will survive this time in which our work has been challenged by the world around us might do well to take a lesson from Suparna. You learn that you participate in every possible way, and you do that with your heart and with your soul. You learn to connect with others. You learn to learn from others, to collaborate with others, and to stand up when problems are hard and need to be solved. And you do that with great respect. Suparna has contributed extensively to her university and to the field through her scholarly activities and through service. She served as Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs at Stony Brook. She was an Associate Editor of Psychological Science and Psychological Bulletin, an Associate Editor at Memory and Cognition, and a member of many other editorial boards. She was elected to the highest governance positions in both the Association for Psychological Science and in the Psychonomic Society. Indeed, she chaired the governing board of the Psychonomic Society as a relatively young mid-career scientist, a position that speaks volumes to the respect with which she's regarded and her leadership skills. A column that she wrote as president of APS, I think, gives away her secret. The column was entitled, "Science is not a spectator sport." But how can we participate? How can we be engaged? When I met Suparna 25 years ago, she and Randy Martin and I had a conversation about the status of women in our discipline. We learned that by working together, we could build new opportunities for others. As Suparna and I have recognized in conversation today, the one thing that she may have learned from me is to drink espresso. And in drinking espresso, it keeps you going for all that you need to do to have the energy to do these things. We made mistakes along the way, but if you are a member of a team, there is nothing to fear. That conversation 25 years ago grew into what we now have as Women in Cognitive Science Plus, and has now been taken on by new leadership who are leading it into this next period with really admirable energy and wisdom. Suparna is a model for how active engagement is not at odds with our science, but enhances it in ways that we may not even begin to imagine. Please join me in welcoming Suparna to tell us about the exciting discoveries in her research.
Thank you, Judy, for that incredible, generous, and heartwarming introduction. You have been an amazing colleague and mentor to me since the day we met 25 years ago. Working together with you has been deeply meaningful to me. It has been a gift, and the greatest gift of all is the espresso habit. So I want to thank everyone who nominated me and the governing board for selecting me as this year's keynote speaker. It's an incredible honor. It's the stuff of dreams. I'm a career-long psychonom. I attended my first Psychonomics in 1990 when I was in graduate school, and it was held in New Orleans. This preeminent society and its torchbearers have made it possible for me to be at this stage today. And to come in the line of past keynote speakers at Psychonomics, including Judy Kroll and Randy Engel, who's somewhere here, and my PhD advisor, Roddy Rodiger, is a tremendous honor for me. And thank you all for giving me your time this evening. It's a great privilege for me to share my research with you. So I want to begin by acknowledging my graduate and postdoc mentors, Jim Neely, Branch Coslet, and Roddy Rodiger, for training me in deep and broad ways. Roddy's here, and this is very special to me. Thank you, Roddy, for career-long advice and support since the time of my graduate training, first at Purdue and then at Rice University. And to this day, I'm grateful, and I feel very fortunate to have had you as my mentor. And speaking of Rice University, I want to give a shout out to Randy Martin and Jim Pomerantz, who's here, who have been pillars of support to me since my graduate training days. And I have many, many colleagues to thank. At Stony Brook, I think Artie Samuel and Lauren Richmond are here, and many colleagues in the discipline at large for their support through the years and for enriching my intellectual life. And among the greatest gifts in my academic career has been the opportunity to train and collaborate with these immensely talented and wonderful doctoral students you see listed on this slide. I'm indebted to all of them for their incredible work and for the joy of collaborating on research ideas, projects, and publishing together. And I'm grateful for the funding support I have received for my research over the years from federal agencies, foundations, and my own institution, Stony Brook University, where I have been since I began my faculty career. So in the first half of my research career to date, I worked on the nature of individual memory, on intact and impaired functions in humans. I was fortunate to be able to collaborate with my research mentors and my graduate students those years, and colleagues across institutions on these topics. In the second half of my career to date, I made a pivot to study the cognition of social remembering. And here too, I've been very fortunate to collaborate with many scientists, faculty, and students at Stony Brook and beyond. And I want to acknowledge their contributions and thank them for sharing their expertise and for the sheer joy of working together. I'm not going to be able to touch on all these projects today, so I invite you to use the QR code to find the list of publications we've produced. My talk today is about the cognitive psychological research, how cognitive psychological research can advance our understanding of social remembering and collective memory. Let me break down why it's important to study this question. Remembering is a profoundly social experience. We humans are social creatures, and our lives are filled with social interactions. Whether we participate in study groups, remember a family vacation, or reconnect with fellow scientists here at Psychonomics, we remember the past with others. And beyond face-to-face interactions, we now routinely connect and share information with others on social media and digital platforms. So the question then is this: do such interactions play an important role in learning and memory? And what is the role of cognition in shaping such social remembering? Beyond the question of how social remembering can influence individuals and individuals' memory, a fascinating consequence of social exchange is the emergence of collective memory. That is, overlapping memories or a shared version of the past. Now, the concept of collective memory has long engaged anthropologists, historians, sociologists, social scientists in general, who've written compelling books on this topic. Within the social sciences, the definitions vary somewhat, but the concept refers to memory narratives that groups, communities, or even nations come to share, where these narratives typically relate to the group's social identity. A study of collective memory in psychological science is a more recent exercise, and here too definitions vary because this is a complex and expansive concept, and because we have different methodological tools that can tap into different aspects of collective memory. Here I want to draw your attention to a recent edited volume by Roddy and historian James Wirch that offers an excellent compilation of interdisciplinary perspectives and scholarship on collective memory. So in general, social sciences focus on top-down or macro-level factors. And these sociopolitical, historical, and contextual dimensions are important and critical for understanding the emergence of social memory, of collective memory. At the same time, the dynamics of social remembering are also constrained by cognitive mechanisms. Interestingly, embedded in the macro-level descriptions is the idea that people develop memories that are socially constructed and reconstructed. Well, it turns out that the process of memory construction and reconstruction has long been a topic of research in cognitive research, with compelling findings and theories reported on the constructive nature of remembering, forgetting, and memory errors. So this background then provides the opportunity to explore an account of how cognitive mechanisms drive social remembering and the construction of collective memory. There's an interesting problem when trying to answer these questions. What we know about the cognitive aspects of memory largely comes from the study of individuals working alone, including my own interest in the study of individual memory for years to date. Now, to be clear, there has been an interest in social influences, at least dating back to 1930s, notably when Bartlett emphasized it, and research has flourished on adjacent topics such as eyewitness memory. But cognitive research on memory has been heavily influenced by Ebbinghaus's approach, who advocated strict experimental control, and this meant extraneous factors, including social influences, had to be excluded in the study of cognitive processes. And this practice held sway for decades, and it has produced an impressive body of work with robust memory findings and key theoretical principles on individual memory ability. A body of work that has been foundational in my own research. This emphasis eventually began to shift. In 1997, a pair of empirical articles appeared in the same journal issue, reporting cognitive research on collaborative and individual remembering. These seminal papers, and a few around then, helped usher in a study of what Mary Sue Weldon called memory as a social process. I approached the study of collaborative remembering and collective memory from this cognitive experimental perspective. And today I want to share with you a sample of this work by my research group. So I'll follow this outline to share our ongoing story. I'll describe a selection of key cognitive processes that come into play during group remembering. I will then describe how their interplay gives rise to collective memory as we define in our approach. I will then delve into a deeper consequence of social remembering in the way this process shapes how we organize memories. And finally, I'll share a study where we scale up from words and investigate in an experimental setting collective memory for narratives. I want to note that today I will focus on accurate memories. So improved memory would mean greater accuracy in memory performance. So how do we study collaborative remembering in an experimental setting? Here's a prototypical paradigm. Drawing from individual memory research, words and pictures are typically used as study materials, as these are particularly suitable for a variety of measurements. So first, participants are presented with a list of carefully selected words, pictures, or similar study materials. At this stage, participants work alone to learn this information, and they're also not told yet whether they will work in groups later. All the studies I will present today use this procedure, except when I'll note otherwise. Participants are then placed in small groups, typically composed of 3 strangers, where they work together and recall the studied information. So this is the typical free recall procedure where participants have a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen, and they report all the items they can remember from the study list. Different types of collaboration can be implemented for group recall. Usually groups engage in free-flowing discussion and use their own preferences for what to include and what to leave out. And these triads come up with a list of words that they studied. Predictably, remembering with others enhances memory such that groups recall more unique items than a single individual would. But to assess the impact of collaboration, comparison is made with a control group called the nominal group, or a group in name only. Here, 3 individuals study the recalled information. Here, 3 individuals recall the studied information while working alone. And the performance of a nominal group is constructed by pooling together the items recalled by these 3 individuals who worked alone, removing the redundancies in pooled recall. When we compare the recall of the collaborative groups with this more appropriate control, namely the nominal groups, the findings become very interesting, as you see in this example, and in these findings that I've taken from Weldon and Bellinger's article. You'll notice there are a pair of bars in each condition on this graph. These are 2 sequential recalls, a procedure often used in these studies. Both recalls show the same pattern across conditions with slightly higher accuracy at recall 2, which is common in this procedure. So let's turn to the main findings. The leftmost bars are the recall of single participants. The middle set shows the nominal or control groups derived from individual recall, and the rightmost bars are the collaborative groups. And what we see is this. Yes, collaborative recall is better than individual recall, but collaborative groups recall less than the nominal groups, exhibiting what Weldon and Bellinger called collaborative inhibition in recall. And here's the same pattern of collaborative inhibition we've observed in a paper led by Helena Blumen, a pattern my group has replicated many times. There are a couple of things I want to note here going forward. The nominal or control condition is on the left, the collaborative condition is to its right, and this will be the case in all the slides that will come up. And also, as I present each study, I'll provide the QR code to access that paper for full details. So this is a counterintuitive finding, but it's also well replicated, including a documented meta-analysis showing this effect. People commonly believe that collaboration is helpful for memory performance, but this effect has been observed with a variety of studied materials and with many populations, such as for materials, emotional materials, movie clips, and with young adults, older adults, children. So why do collaborative groups recall less than their potential? Social loafing is an obvious possibility where each group member may leave the responsibility to others, but this does not account for the collaborative group deficit. For example, even when people receive incentives, the recall deficit persists. Even when people take turns to recall, so they must contribute, collaborative inhibition is observed. Instead, for this deficit, the reason appears to be cognitive in nature. And one key cognitive explanation is retrieval disruption. We know from a long history of research that people have a propensity to organize information, even unrelated information. So when we learn new information, we organize this in idiosyncratic ways in our minds, reflecting our own history of learning and knowledge. And when we recall together, an item that another group member recalled may not be the one I planned to recall. So this disrupts my own sequence. As group members disrupt one another by recalling together, each group member's output is lowered, and thereby the group's output is lowered. And this leads to this effect of collaborative inhibition. So at this point, perhaps some of you are thinking about a related finding, one that comes from individual recall studies. I'm referring here to partless queuing recall. Let me explain why this is interesting to consider here. The partless queuing procedure goes like this. There's the standard study procedure where participants learn a list of words and it recall in the control condition. Subjects recall the words on a blank piece of paper or computer, a typical free recall task. In the partless queuing condition, at the outset, subjects receive a subset of the studied words to serve as cues that can help them remember the remaining studied words. Going back to 1968, Slameka reported a series of experiments showing that receiving these cues actually lowers recall of the remaining studied words compared to receiving no cues. We recently reported a meta-analysis led by Nick Pepe with Anne Moyer and Tori Pena, documenting the robustness of this impairment in individual recall. So you see the similarity here. A subset of studied words recalled by other group members in collaborative recall, and a subset given as cues in individual recall, both reduce memory performance. So these parallels have prompted the same cognitive explanations for collaborative inhibition as the ones offered for partless queuing impairment. Retrieval disruption that I just described is one such explanation. There's another explanation, and that is also cognitive in nature. When people leave groups and then recall the information alone, they recover much of it. But we've found that collaboration also leads to retrieval inhibition, where some information is functionally forgotten in that people do not report it later. In this study, led by Sarah Barber and in collaboration with Celia Harris, we found that participants who had earlier collaborated later showed impaired recognition memory. Not just impaired recall, but impaired recognition for items they had earlier failed to recall compared to those who never collaborated. In other words, cognitive processes reduce memory when people recall in groups. So now, while there are these similarities between group recall and individual recall with partless queuing procedures, in terms of memory impairment, collaboration changes memory in many other ways. To explore this, we can begin by asking, how collaboration might offset these cognitive costs. I mentioned before a common belief that collaboration improves memory. Does this happen? And how so? So for this, I will focus on a process we've called re-exposure, a process where listening to others' recall can improve memory performance. We've taken a few different approaches to assess the role of re-exposure in conjunction with retrieval disruption. And here's one study led by Hae-Yoon Choi and in collaboration with Helena Blumen and Adam Congleton, where we changed the transmission of memory in groups. And to do that, we implemented reconfigured groups. Now, this design builds on the paradigm I showed you before. As before, everyone first works alone to learn the study materials, and then we have a sequence of 3 recalls. Leftmost is the control condition, where everyone recalls alone, and we calculate the nominal group recall. Next is the identical group condition. This is the same as the collaborative groups I've shown you before, but here the triads recall together and they perform this task once more. The third condition here is of most interest, the reconfigured groups. In the first recall, these groups do exactly what the identical groups did, just do a standard collaborative recall. But in the second recall is where interesting things happen, where after recalling in one group, each group member now works with 2 different partners who had earlier worked with other partners. So because each group member collaborates with twice as many partners over the course of recall, the influence on memory would be greater for those in the reconfigured groups. But you might say that this should cause more disruption because each member listens to more people recalling, and this would further disrupt their own recall strategy. It's true, there could be more disruption. But there's also an opportunity for another process to operate that I mentioned, re-exposure. And this is a simple idea. When we recall with others, we are exposed to what they're saying, and the more people there are, there's more variety of information that they're recalling. So there's also more potential to hear information that one might have forgotten. So the question then is this: can these gains offset the cost of disruption when people recall with others? We look at these different possibilities in recall 2 at the level of the group. And we can also assess this in the third recall, where everyone now recalls alone. What is the impact of their prior history of collaboration for these disruptive influences and these re-exposure gains to come together? I want to highlight 3 findings. First, here's recall 1. This is the stage where everything is same for the identical and reconfigured groups. So we should expect collaborative inhibition for both groups, and that's what we find. Compared to the baseline nominal group, the leftmost bar, both collaborative groups show reduced recall. The main question is what happens in recall 2? Here, identical groups continue to show collaborative inhibition. This is the middle bar. But this deficit disappears entirely for the reconfigured groups. So while there may be disruptive effects when we collaborate with more people, the re-exposure gains are far greater. We can assess the downstream consequences of these gains by looking at the third recall, where everyone recalled alone. And we see here that collaboration produces memory gains for both groups, but the gains are greater for those who were in the reconfigured groups. So what we see is this: group collaboration causes retrieval disruption, but it also confers re-exposure gains. I'll return to these processes working in tandem in a minute, but first I want to add a note of caution. A possible pitfall of being exposed to others' recall in groups. Listening to others improves our memory, but if what others are saying is incorrect, then this will have the opposite consequence. We are exploring these error contagion effects in another line of work, but today I want to return to the processes I've described so far. These processes are among many that come into play during collaborative recall. And now, you may not be able to see the details here, but that's not the point of the slide. What I want to communicate is that we've been developing an integrative framework to catalog these processes highlighted here in red ink. Some processes improve memory, the ones in boxes in solid lines. Others impair memory, the ones in dashed lines. And evidence for the role of these myriad mechanisms activated during collaboration comes from many labs. What I want to talk about now is the confluence of these processes in shaping collective memory. So let's return to the two processes I described in the experiment with identical and reconfigured groups, disruption and re-exposure working in tandem, and see how these two opposing processes shape collective memory. Now, to compute collective memory, as with the approach many other labs have taken, we assess the memory output without reference to social identity. So what we are examining here are shared memories that serve as the cognitive origins of collective memory. So let's say that this group studied a list of words and during collaboration recalled the words shown here. In post-collaborative recall, each member now recalls alone, and we calculate the overlapping items across the recall outputs of these members. So in this example, the group had earlier recalled 4 words, but only 2 of these words, apple and chair, appear in every group member's individual recall later. This gives us a measure of shared or collective memory. In some studies, items everyone forgets are also counted as collective forgetting, and in this example, none of the former collaborators remembered the word glass later. So what do we find for the identical and reconfigured groups? We see that earlier collaboration in both groups gives rise to more collective memory compared to nominal groups that never collaborated. But an interesting twist we see here, captured in the light gray portions of the bars, is that if people collaborate repeatedly with the same partners, this is the identical group, they are more prone to forgetting the same information, indicating that talking to the same folks over and over again homogenizes our memories more. So it's rather impressive that it takes only 1 or 2 collaborations for these shared memories to develop. In this study on the left, led by Adam Congleton, we also found that collective memories can persist even after 1 week following initial learning and recall. And on the right side, in a recent experimental study co-led by Garrett Greeley and Tony Pena, we observed collective memory following a fully remote online collaboration among strangers, and this was after just 1 collaborative recall sessions. So in other words, people develop collective memory readily, and these memories persist over time. So as I describe the ways in which collaborative remembering changes memory, it's worth returning to a question I considered before: some similarities between individual recall with partless cues and collaborative recall. To remind you again, a subset of the studied words recalled by other group members in collaborative recall, or a subset of partless cues given in individual recall, both reduce memory performance. But beyond the similarities of these disruptive effects I have described you already in other ways in which collaborative recall is different. In the next study, we explored this by directly comparing collaborative recall and partless cueing recall, where we tested many questions. So this study was led by Tori Pena in collaboration with Nick Pepe. What we did was to create a yoked procedure by equating cue information and measurement units across the social condition of collaboration and the non-social condition of partless cueing. So in this non-social condition, participants received the cues on a computer monitor and recalled alone, while in the social condition, we preserved the collaborative nature of recall. We also had the usual control condition to measure nominal group recall. On Saturday, Tori Peña will present a fuller description of the project and several key results. Today, I want to talk about the collective memory findings in this paper. So the social nature of collaborative recall creates a dynamic and reciprocal process of exchange that's unique to social remembering and that's absent in individual recall. So the question then is this: would collective memory increase following collaborative recall, but not following the non-social partless queuing recall? The findings are striking and clear. In this yoke procedure, collective memory increased only following collaborative recall. So this finding offers a powerful display of how remembering with others promotes collective memory. So what we see is that collaboration changes individual memory and collective memory emerges. So this brings up a related question. Does collaboration change not only what we remember, but also how we organize this information? Here I'm referring to retrieval organization. That is the sequence in which people report studied information that they recall. Does this organization change for individual group members, and do group members begin to organize recall in similar ways, such that we may begin to see the emergence of collective memory organization? So why study memory organization? As I had mentioned earlier, people have a propensity to organize information, even for unrelated words, when they recall. And organization gives us better access to past information. There's also evidence to show that it facilitates learning of new information. In fact, there's extensive research on retrieval organization when individuals recall alone. But we do not know much about the nature of this phenomenon following collaboration. Would we say changes in individual retrieval organization, and would group members begin to synchronize their recall patterns? What can we expect? We know that collaboration disrupts the preferred retrieval organization that group members bring to the task. We also know that people can incorporate more information through re-exposure. And then there are other processes that I didn't delve into today that can change the recall sequence that each group member would have preferred. So all of this can lead to a new recall sequence that emerges during collaboration. So what is the impact of this new sequence? We can assess this possibility by comparing each member's recall sequence before and after collaboration. Now, there are classic measures of retrieval organization, subjective organization and categorical clustering being two well-known measures that have been widely applied in individual memory research. We've adapted these measures in some recall studies where we used collaboration. These measures capture small clusters of organized information in recall, giving us local measures of organization within a recall sequence. Today, I want to describe a recent study where we've applied another computational tool with the goals to assess the organization of the entire recall list. That is, organization at a global level. So to assess such global level organization and recall, we leverage the representational similarity analysis, or RSA. RSA is widely used to compute the organization of neural representation in the brain. Here we applied it to free recall data. Now, this computational measure offers a leap in our ability to capture organization because it reveals how the entire recall sequence is organized. We can compute the positional relations among all items, not only the items that were recalled, but also the forgotten items. And as a result, we can compute shifts in the positions of recall within, position of items within a recall sequence, which gives us crucial insights into how the entire sequence is changing. And these capabilities give us a holistic view of memory organization and the potential to help us assess narrative construction and reconstruction. This work was an enormous team effort with synergistic expertise. It was co-led by Francis Jin and Heyun Choi in collaboration with Garrett Greeley, Nick Pepe, Elizabeth Kensinger, and Aprajita Mohanty. And here's the design of the behavioral experiment. After the study phase, participants were placed in 3 different recall conditions. I'll describe today the 2 conditions that are of interest for the RSA application. Each condition involved 3 sequential recalls. On the left, we have the usual control condition. Each participant recalled alone, and we calculated the nominal group recall. On the right is the collaboration condition, and here at recall 1 and recall 3, each participant recalled alone. At recall 2, 3 participants worked together to recall the study list. This condition affords us a before and after comparison to assess whether the individual retrieval strategy changes when people engage in collaborative recall. We can also assess whether after collaboration, that is in recall 3, the individual strategy becomes more similar for those who collaborated together. So in this way, we can assess whether collaborative recall can alter this global level retrieval organization. So for this computation, here's an example taken from the collaboration condition. Here you see a sketch of the study list. You will notice that we used emotionally valenced words. For this analysis, valence did not have an effect, so I'll collapse over it. Next, we take the recall sequence of a particular subject, and we assign the position in which a particular word was recalled, assigning this order to all items, both remembered and forgotten items. The forgotten items are given an extremely high value. This process is implemented for each subject and for each recall, including the intervening group recall. Next, we construct a representational dissimilarity matrix, or RDMs, for each recall sequence, both for the within-subject recalls and for the group recall. Here, the relative distance between each item and every other item in the recall sequence is computed and entered into the matrix. And once the RDMs are constructed, we vectorize the upper triangle as shown below the matrices. At step 3, we use vector correlations to compute the similarity between recalls. So in this way, we have a holistic picture of how the recall sequence is changing. I'll present 2 key results. The relation between recall 1 and recall 3 gives us the similarity between 2 individual recall sequences. Here we can see whether the intervening collaboration reduces this similarity. This would suggest a change in individual retrieval organization because of the intervening collaboration. The relationship between recall 2, which is the collaborative recall, and recall 3, which is an individual recall, will show us the extent to which individual recall strategies might become similar to group strategy for people who collaborated, giving us a handle on the emergence of collective retrieval organization. So here's the comparison between recall 1, individual recall, recall 3, individual recall, and the collaborative condition is again on the right. We see that when collaboration intervenes, it indeed disrupts the individual strategy. So what is the nature of this change? For those who collaborated, are their later retrieval strategies more like the group strategy? So using multidimensional scaling, here's a visualization for the ICI, individual, collaborative, individual condition, showing us these 3 recall stages. This is one of the 16 groups. Blue dots represent recall 1, which was always individual recall. Yellow mustard dots represent recall 3, which was also individual recall. And the red triangle represents the intervening collaborative recall. So what we see is that following collaboration, individual strategies at recall 3 drift towards group strategy, therefore towards one another. And here you can see this pattern in all the groups. And in fact, we do see it for all the groups. So this pattern illustrates the emergence of global level collective memory organization. This holistic capture of retrieval organization and how this organization changes offers a potential path in future work to explore the construction and reconstruction of memory narratives. So I have shared with you the following. Collaborative recall impairs memory. Collaborative recall also improves memory. And multiple cognitive processes come into play when we collaborate, and collaboration synchronizes memory, giving rise to collective memory. So these findings come from basic research in the lab using controlled stimuli such as words and pictures for study and recall. So this lab work then sets up the foundation to explore more naturalistic memory events. In the last part of my presentation, I want to talk about such scaling up from words to narratives. In our foray into narratives, we used autobiographical narratives. These narratives provide a compelling way to address the question at hand. So as I said at the outset, a major motivation behind research on social remembering and collective memory is to understand how memory narratives develop for life events. And people routinely share autobiographical memories in social contexts. So we can leverage basic research to investigate these real-life experiences. Autobiographical memories are recollections we have of specific personal events in our lives and knowledge about oneself. So in the study of autobiographical memory, retrospective ratings given by participants suggest that when we share autobiographical memories, this retelling and co-constructing reduces the negativity of these memories. And theoretical proposals suggest that such emotion regulation may be a reason for such social sharing. So we became interested in this potential role of social sharing and tested it in the context of collaborative remembering in an experimental setting. And we had another key goal, whether collaborative remembering gives rise to collective memory for these personal events. This study was led by Raya Maswood in collaboration with Anna Rasmussen. Now, there are some challenges we face when asking these questions about collective memory. For one thing, autobiographical memories are by definition unique to an individual, so subjects recall different events from different time points. And for another, the researcher typically lacks access to these varied events that the subject is reporting. So these challenges make it difficult to assess collective memory formation. So to overcome these challenges, we devised what we call an experiment in the wild. Autobiographical memories are real-life events that have personal value and have been typically explored in naturalistic studies. Collaborative remembering has been studied in controlled experiments with words or pictures that have informational value. So we integrated these two research traditions. And so to do this, we selected campus exam periods as autobiographical events. This choice gives us a rare combination of an emotional autobiographical event. Students have positive and negative feelings around exams, a naturalistic context to which we researchers had access. Our research assistants had approved access to be discreetly in attendance at these exams. and an event that was experienced by all participants. Each group in our experiment was drawn from the same exam period, and we ensured that these participants within a group were not friends. So by doing all of this, we harnessed all of this into an experiment. And here's a distilled version of this elaborate study. All participants provided valence ratings and memory narratives for their exam experience. Today, I will focus on the memory narratives, as these measures also allowed us to compute collective memory. Half the participants worked individually throughout the experiment and wrote their memory narrative about the exam experience twice. The other half of the participants also wrote their narratives twice, first collaborating as a triad to provide a joint narrative, and then writing it again individually. And to assess the impact of collaboration on emotion regulation and collective memory formation, we examined the final individual narratives. To assess emotion regulation following collaborative recall, we coded the narratives for emotional tone and narrative details. I'll focus on emotional tone today, positive, negative, mixed tone, or neutral. And to compute collective memory, we coded 2 types of memory details and then calculated the overlap in recall of these details across participants within the same group, collaborative or nominal. Internal details suggest more rumination and introspection relative to external details. For example, I was nervous, I got stuck on a few questions. External details are observable events, like I dropped my pen, 3 TAs and a professor were present. So turning to the emotion regulation findings first. We see consistent patterns across emotional tones, so I will focus on the positive and negative tones. So positive tone would be phrases like, I anticipate a good grade, I'm feeling prepared, the exam was easy, I enjoyed the subject, expressions of confidence. And negative tone would be anticipating bad grades, confusion, I didn't really study for this exam, I found the subject difficult, I feel nervous, and so on. So prior collaboration was associated with a more positive tone and a less negative tone in later individual recall. And as an aside, we also saw that people reported more external details if they had collaborated earlier, suggesting less rumination. So these findings suggest that collaborative recall is associated with emotion downregulation. When you share your joy, you double it. When you share your sorrow, you halve it. So now I turn to collective memory. Following collaborative recall, people developed collective memory. And we can see this outcome for both types of details, internal details and external details. So this experimental study gives us an example of how we can scale up from words to real-life narratives and compute effects of interest. By evaluating narratives, especially autobiographical narratives, we move closer to understanding collective memory for real-life events. And this brings us full circle to the overarching question that has motivated this line of research: how social influences shape our memory narratives. So I'd like to leave you with some concluding thoughts. Today I had the opportunity to share with you the basic cognitive analysis we are doing in my group to delve into the nature of social remembering. As humans, we make sense of our past by constructing and co-constructing narratives. And these narratives do not emerge in a vacuum. We often construct them in a social milieu, reminiscing with others. And as our conversational partners influence our memories and we influence theirs, our memories tend to become aligned, giving rise to a shared version of the past. A cognitive experimental analysis shows us how cognitive processes that are well known to influence individual memory come into play during group remembering, exerting influence in concert or in opposition. What we remember, misremember, and forget can have far-reaching consequences distilling information on which we base our performances, decisions, actions in many areas of life. So I conclude today by noting that cognitive psychological research specifies a process of bottom-up accumulation of shared representations, advancing a complementary and interdisciplinary understanding of the reciprocal process that exerts influences between the individual and the group, and how collective memories emerge. Thank you for your time and attention. I wish all of you peak cognition this Psychonomics.
Thank you, Suparna, for that outstanding keynote, and we'd like to present you with a token of our appreciation.